What are dragon seeds? Which line in the episode paid tribute to the airplane movies? And what thing from this episode also featured in the Game of Thrones episode 2? Keep watching to find the answers to these questions and more. Welcome to Square Eyes, the channel where we recap, review and take a sideways look at your favourite TV shows. In this video we're looking at episode 3 of season 2 of House of the Dragon, called The Burning Mill. Let's jump straight into the recap. The episode opens on some guys from the Bracken and Blackwood houses squaring up to each other. The dispute is about some boundary stones being moved, and because each house has taken a different side on the Blacks versus Greens dispute for the crown, though apparently these two families don't really need much excuse to get at each other's throats, so really they're just glad to have a fight with each other. What starts as a fairly minor looking squabble between a few young men ends in a scene of complete devastation, with hundreds of dead bodies from both sides and the windmill a smouldering mess in the background. I don't think there's a clear winner, it just looks like a sea of broken bodies. I think the idea of there being no winners when families fight is illustrated further in the next scene, when Arik and Eric's bodies are buried next to each other on Dragonstone. As the bodies are being buried, Rhaenys suggests to Rhaenyra that she try to talk Alicent round and avert the coming war. Rhaenyra pushes back on the idea because of all the things that have happened between the two sides, but he's obviously thinking about it because of the history between her and Alicent. Over in King's Landing, Sir Criston Cole is getting ready for his first day as Hand to the King, and he's already late for his first small council meeting. When he gets there, the first piece of business is the news of the Blackwoods fighting the Brackens. Aemon tells the council that Lord Bracken died in the fighting, so King Aegon is happy to consider it a win for his side, though Tyler Lannister spoils the fun by pointing out that both sides took heavy losses. The conversation moves on by deciding what action to take next. The council is a shambles, with nobody agreeing with anyone, and all the ideas sounding poorly thought out. The worst idea of them all is Criston Cole's suggestion to rush out with a small force of men to capture Harrenhal quickly, and then increase his numbers as he goes out to try and secure the Riverlands. Alicent is quick to point out how likely this move is to fail, and how trying to rush things ended in Sir Arik's death the day before. Aegon approves Sir Criston's scheme, despite it being poorly thought through and needlessly risky. Aegon suggests that Aemon tag along with Vhagar to keep them company, as the dragon will improve their chances. Criston Cole is dead against this, on the surface because Vhagar is needed to defend the city, but most likely because dragons in battles will burn men from all sides once they get started, so the men doing the fighting would probably rather they didn't get involved regardless of what side they're on. Aegon suggests he'll come in his own dragon instead of his brother, which leads to Aemon telling him that he's too important to be risked, when the reality is that he's not to be trusted in battle, and no one will want him anywhere near the front line. Aegon, quite pathetically, insists that he's as brave as anyone else, and receives a look from his mother that suggests she's not sure how brave her little boy is. Over in Dragonstone, Mysaria didn't catch her boat, and instead decided to hang around and help Rhaenyra smash the high towers. She wants to place in Rhaenyra's court, and in exchange she can give her the secrets of the Red Keep in King's Landing, so she can avoid tripping over plot holes. Rhaena, one of Daemon's daughters and Rhaenyra's stepdaughter, is given the job of escorting Rhaenyra's younger children to live with Jane Arryn in the Vale, which will kill two birds with one stone, as it will mean she can also make good on her promise to Jane Arryn to give her a dragon in exchange for her loyalty. Daemon then swoops into Harrenhal on his dragon and enters the castle with his sword drawn, ready to fight his way through whatever resistance is there on his arrival. He seems a bit gutted when the dilapidated castle is poorly defended, and its castellan, Simon Strong, bends the knee immediately to him. I think Daemon enjoys a good fight more than he enjoys winning, so to just breeze through and take control was a bit disappointing to him. We find out over dinner that the lord of the Strong family, Larys, is not popular with Simon Strong. A fire that killed Larys' brother and father was obviously deliberate, and Simon knows this, so therefore he's happy to declare his allegiance to Rhaenyra and welcome Daemon into the castle. Interestingly, Daemon wants to be referred to as Your Grace rather than Prince, suggesting he sees himself as a king, not as a prince consort. I'm not sure his wife would agree on this point of royal protocol, but it's no doubt something that's being set up for later in the season. Daemon expresses his desire to use Harrenhal as a base of operation to gather an army from the surrounding houses. Simon Strong explains the castle is in a state of disrepair, and that the Brackens and Blackwoods are already at each other's throats, so aren't likely to unite in a single army. Daemon isn't the kind of person who will listen to negative Nancies for too long, so he insists that the disrepair should be converted to a state of repair, and that he will personally oversee the relations between the feuding households, with his dragon nearby to help focus everyone's minds. Despite speed being a vital part of Criston Cole's plan to rush out to war, he's decided to take a trip to the barber's for a trim before going out to battle. I suppose the last thing you want is floppy hair falling in your eyes in the middle of a sword fight. Fans of floppy hair don't need to worry though, as a new floppy-haired young man enters the story in the shape of Sir Gawain Hightower, who is Alicent's brother and has been brought in to be a pain in Sir Criston's backside by the looks of things, which I'm all for. Before Criston Cole leaves, he asks Alicent for her favour, which seems to be a hanky that she has stuffed down her top. Alicent doesn't seem keen on the idea. In fact, she seems like she hates him at this moment, despite showing feelings to the contrary in recent episodes. Maybe she liked that hanky and didn't want to give it away. More likely she's seen that Criston Cole is a bit of an idiot, and his guidance to the king is nearly always ill-advised. Aegon isn't the only one getting poor advice. Rhaenyra's council don't seem up to much either. Their solution to every problem is to send dragons in and burn everything to the ground. If they're in a restaurant and their soup was cold, the whole restaurant will be a pile of ashes before the waiter had a chance to take it back to the kitchen. Rhaenyra wants a more cautious approach, but her old men at the council keep telling her to use the dragons instead. Rhaenys tells them off and the two women walk away. Corlys continues to be involved in dull scenes without a lot of purpose. This time one where he chats with Rhaenys about who his successor should be to the Driftwood throne. This was something that was covered in the last season, but characters dying off means there are now different grandchildren to consider as heirs. Not a great prospect, so the current plan is for Corlys not to die. Rhaenyra is sent to Jane Arryn in the Vale with some small dragons that cannot fight and some dragon eggs. This feels like Rhaenyra is technically meeting the terms of her agreement with Lady Jane, but is risking upsetting her by not providing her with the sort of fearsome dragon I'm sure she wanted when the deal was originally struck. Rhaenyra is then packed away with the children and the eggs as a sort of insurance policy in case everyone else dies, so she can keep the family's future alive with the next generation of children and dragons. And there's a conversation between Alicent and Helena, where they're initially talking about the grieving process, but then Helena quickly changes topic and out of nowhere tells her mother that she forgives her. Alicent is speechless, but her teary reaction shows that she understands and is grateful for this gesture. After all, it was her alone time with Sir Criston Cole that left the Red Keep undefended when the assassins were creeping around the castle. In the next scene, King Aegon is trying on his new suit of armour in preparation to fly out on his dragon to join Sir Criston. Despite the council telling him he shouldn't go, he wants to go out and prove that he can be brave. This is obviously a terrible idea, but none of the White Cloaks, who are busy giving him compliments about his armour, dare to say anything to him. Instead it takes Solaris to come and treat him like a toddler. He pretends that there are rumours that King Aegon has been tricked into leaving the city to go to war so that his mother can take control of things in his absence. Had Larys told Aegon not to go because it was too dangerous, then there'd be no way that he would have convinced him to stay in the city. But because he appealed to his fear that people think he was weak and foolish, it works. Aegon can't bear the idea that people are saying that he's been outmanoeuvred, so he decides that he will stay instead. He also asks Solaris to be his Master of Whispers, giving him a close position at the king's side. King Aegon then takes out a young squire to a brothel for his first encounter with the lady, where Aegon shows that he's obviously very familiar with both the establishment and the women that work there. He searches the venue for a particular woman who he has in mind to entertain the young squire, pulling back the curtains until he finds the right one. Unfortunately, Aemond is naked and curled up snuggling with the lady of the night that Aegon is looking for. This leads to Aegon mocking Aemond for still spending time with the sex worker that he used for his first time, and he's generally unkind to his little brother. While Aemond acts like this is no big deal as he strolls out without any clothes on, I suspect he's furious about this humiliation, and it's likely to have consequences for Aegon down the line. Then we see that Sir Gawain has ditched the main army in search of a pub to spend the night, when Sir Criston Cole chases him down to tell him to return to the main camp. While they debate where he and his mate should sleep, the sky darkens and Cole realises it's because a dragon is approaching. They all rush to the nearest tree cover, but not before Baela drops out of the sky on her dragon. She dive bombs them, and probably could have burned them to cinders if she wanted to, but instead pulls up and settles on scaring them half to death instead. She then goes back to Dragonstone and reports the news. Though some ravens have already confirmed the larger armed forces were moving north too, so you have to question the efficiency of using a dragon for surveillance, particularly when the spy's information is fed to you by Phil Daniels, who sadly doesn't shout park life after every bit of information he says in this role. The old men continue to plead with Rhaenyra to use her dragons on her enemies. She looks like she's about to say yes, but holds back and says she's going to think about it. Over in Harrenhal, it looks like Daemon is having some sort of cheese dream or something, when he sees young Rhaenyra stitching together Rhaenys' head to his neck. I don't know exactly what this fantasy sequence is, but it has something to do with the woman we see at the end of it, who tells him he's going to die in this place, who may be a sorcerer of some sort. Daemon seems pretty freaked out by it though. He should probably lay off eating cheese late at night. Rhaenyra asks Mysaria for inside information on Alicent so she can have a private chat with her, which is apparently trickier than murdering her, though face-to-face chat is Rhaenyra's preference as she thinks that's the best way to avoid all-out war. Mysaria knows how to get her in if she goes on a fishing boat and visits the only place Alicent goes outside the castle without her guards, the Sept. So Rhaenyra dresses up as a nun and sneaks into the room with all the candles where her old friend is praying. Or scheming. Probably scheming, actually. Anyway, Rhaenyra kneels next to her and flashes a blade to show her that she'll shank her if she raises the alarm, but then insists she only wants a little chat, because every nice little chat starts at knife point. Rhaenyra tries to find common ground and a chance to compromise between them, but Alicent only wants to hear talk of surrender from her. Then each denies any involvement in the slaying of the children on both sides of the dispute, with neither believing the other. Then we get to the meat of the conversation, where Alicent insists that King Viserys changed his mind about the succession and wanted Aegon to be king. Rhaenyra knows this isn't true, because she spoke to him on the night of his death and he repeated his wish for her to be the queen. Alicent swears on her dead mother that Viserys changed his mind, with such conviction that you can see that Rhaenyra is rattled for the first time. She experiences doubt and wonders if perhaps her father really did choose his son over her with his last breath, so she asks Alicent exactly what he said. Alicent explains a whispered words her dying husband said about Aegon and the prince that was promised, which she misunderstood to be about her son's right to the throne, but Rhaenyra immediately knows is about the prophecy that he told her about. It's a story about Aegon the Conqueror, and nothing to do with her son. Rhaenyra tries to explain to Alicent that it's all a mistake, and war could cost many lives because of it. Alicent says that there's no mistake. Even if there was, her son is surrounded by people out for blood now, and he's determined to go to war. It's too late to stop it from happening. The episode ends on Rhaenyra's face, looking into the candles, knowing that war is now inevitable. I thought this was another good episode, and you might finally have seen the war start, as we saw a minor battle between two rival houses fighting on behalf of the two sides at the start of the episode. But if it wasn't the official start of the war, the scene at the end of the episode between Alicent and Rhaenyra confirmed that all-out war is the only possible direction this conflict is heading now. I can't see there being any alternative now after that last-ditch attempt at diplomacy failed. I thought the fight between the Brackens and Blackwoods at the start was quite interesting, as it felt like it deliberately had a lot of similarities between the Greens and Blacks dispute. A long-running feud where each side had a different explanation about what the real problem was. Did the battle start because the boundary was moved? Because each of their houses swore allegiance to different monarchs? Was it because one of the Blackwoods called one of the Brackens craven? Or was it just because the two families hate each other and any excuse is good enough for a battle? Or maybe even young men in general are always on the lookout for excuses to test their masculinity against each other. But back to my original point, it was a conflict with murky origins, but too much bad blood existed for it to be settled through other means, and violence was the only way to resolve it. So that's why I think it's like the Green and Blacks dispute. This episode saw Rhaenyra repeatedly being pushed towards war with dragons by her council of old men. She was in a tricky position because she needs these people to be loyal to her, as they mostly represent households that she needs by her sides in the coming war. But she also needs better advice than to just mindlessly hurl dragons at every problem. These guys seem pretty useless. They also didn't seem to have any respect for Rhaenyra, despite the fact that she's their queen. I can see a point coming where she's going to have to assert some authority over this council, even if it risks losing some of the support she has. The women Rhaenyra has around her at least seem a bit more competent, with Mysaria having the inside knowledge of King's Landing that she needed to get inside the city and to access Alicent safely, and Rhaenys seeming to give her sensible advice and keeping the old men of the council in check a bit too. While Daemon isn't the kind of person who wants to hang around and play diplomacy, he would probably be helpful to Rhaenyra in this situation. I can't see anyone risking undermining her with him by her side, as they will probably find themselves getting their head lopped off pretty quickly. Aegon's council didn't seem a lot better either, with opinions divided about the best strategy, and Sir Criston looking very nervy about his first day as Hand of the King. Maybe he was uneasy about the new job was part of his decision to ride out of the city and rush into war, so he didn't have to embarrass himself in the small council meetings. I didn't mention it in my review, but there was also a noticeable fall in standards of the King's Guard, with several of them obviously slumping when they should have been standing to attention, and Aegon had personally appointed some of his mates to the order to replace Eric and Arik after their fatal fight with each other in the last episode. This drop in the standards of the King's personal bodyguards may become relevant later in the story. Despite the fact no blood was shed or punches thrown, the best scene in the episode came at the end when Rhaenyra confronted Alicent. It presented the last possible chance for war to be avoided, but actually, looking back, there was no way this conversation could have stopped the war, as neither woman can control the men on either side enough to stop them. I liked how the scene revealed how the whole conflict hinges on a misunderstanding of a dying man's ramblings, and the Targaryen family reusing names far too often. If there weren't so many Aegons, this could have all been avoided. But because Alicent thought Viserys was talking about her son Aegon, when he was actually talking about Aegon the Conqueror and the Song of Ice and Fire, it set this whole course of action in motion. I like the way that this scene showed that both women had their doubts about whether they were right, but eventually they came away convinced that they were correct and the other one was wrong. Because the mission was so dangerous and there was such a low chance of success, I also wonder if Rhaenyra's purpose wasn't to try and talk Alicent around, but instead to look her in the eye and see if she is lying. Now she knows that the whole thing is based on a misunderstanding that Alicent won't back down from. She knows that she can commit to the war with no regrets. In my last video, I hope that this episode was going to be the one that tipped over into full-scale war. And while it didn't quite happen, I'm happy enough to have had another one where we inch closer and closer to the conflict that now feels inevitable. The stakes have all been set up nicely, and all the characters are really unlikable in a way that I really enjoy not liking them, if that makes any sense. To try and explain that more, I don't think any of the characters in the show are wholly good, apart from Helena maybe, but I find myself enjoying spending time with them anyway. And often the worst behaved are the most fun to watch on screen too, so they're likeably unlikable, if you see what I mean. In other words, I'm really enjoying watching this season, and I'm looking forward to seeing where the rest of the story goes. My favourite line in this episode came from Daemon when he said, "It's a big chair, made of swords," when Simon Strong expressed his surprise about his ambition to march south to take the throne. It reminded me of a format of joke from Leslie Nielsen comedies, where someone would repeat a word in the form of a question, and he would deliberately misunderstand them and explain the definition of the word rather than answer the question. I suspect this was a nod to comedies such as Naked Gun and Airplane, given Matt Smith's great delivery of the line. The winner of this week's episode has to be Daemon, after he single-handedly took control of Harrenhal. Nobody's going to write songs about the brave deeds required, or fearsome foes he had to overcome to occupy the castle, but it's the biggest castle in Westeros, and it's now his. He's still in the bad books with his wife, and I think he's hoping to win her back with a huge victory in the war. So there's still work for him to do, but he's made an important step by getting the castle before anyone else could, and he's now got a plan to get the local houses on side too. I was tempted to pick the single guard that died in Daemon's capture of Harrenhal as this week's loser, given the poor guy seemed to be the only person interested in defending the huge castle. But instead I picked Daemon as the loser of this week's episode, after his brother drunkenly humiliated him in the pleasure house. While he tried to brush it off like it was no big deal, I think Daemon is actually quite thin-skinned and doesn't easily forget this sort of thing. In last week's episode he was talking about how being teased as a child still bothered him in the same pleasure house, so I doubt being teased in a similar manner in the same place would be taken lightly. So Aemond is a loser this week, but my suspicion is that he won't take this disrespect lightly, and Aegon will pay a heavy price for his behaviour down the line. Aemond is dangerous in his own right, but he's also the rider of the world's biggest and most lethal dragon, so it's the equivalent of making a nuclear bomb angry with you. Not a good move. There was a little detail I really liked in the scene where Alicent introduces Sir Criston to her brother. If you pay attention, you can see Solaris Strong in the background. He doesn't have any lines or do anything, but he's lurking, watching, paying attention to what's happening without being noticed. That's exactly what his character would do, and it's a lovely little detail that I'm pleased they added in without calling a huge amount of attention to it with a close-up. It may not be particularly relevant to the story in the future, but it shows how Larys is always keeping a watchful eye over comings and goings in King's Landing, either personally or through his network of spies. Just before King Aegon enters the pleasure house, there's a discussion where a character we've seen in previous episode, called Ulf, tells anyone who will listen that his father was an illegitimate child of a former king. This gives him royal blood and makes him something called a dragon seed. Having not read the books, I had to Google what this means, and it's someone of Valyrian heritage, meaning they're linked to the Targaryen or Valerian households, but not through marriage. It's obvious that they're drawing viewers' attentions towards this word dragon seed and what it means, and it's likely to be relevant to the plot in future episodes. An article on Mashable says that the director of this episode has confirmed that the dragon eggs we saw being sent away in this episode are the same dragon eggs that eventually turn up in Game of Thrones and become Dany's dragons, so there's a proper Easter egg in this episode. Like the shot of the rat catchers hanging last week, the shot of the aftermath of the Battle of the Burning Mill was a mixture of real actors and 3D dummies. The guy with a sword through his throat is a 3D model, which I think is really cool because it's the sort of thing that is often achieved through CGI these days, but it's nice to see practical effects being used to make it feel more gritty and real. There was some CGI being used for this scene though, such as for the Burning Mill, which is understandable, but weirdly, also for the Boundary Stones. I can't really understand why they couldn't just pile up some rocks in real life, but they added them in with computers instead for some reason. The trailer for the next episode looks very exciting, but if you don't want any spoilers, now is the time to click away from the video. If you want to speculate about what's coming up, then stick around. In the trailer we see the Dragonstone map looking menacing, Daemon grabbing his helmet like he's about to go into battle, Sir Criston lopping off someone's head, a camp with what looks like Daemon overlooking it. Then we see an army coming out of the woods, a dragon flying through the sky, boats sailing across the sea. Basically, it looks like it's all kicking off after 3 episodes of steadily building up to it. This looks like it'll finally be the episode where you get to see the proper war. We also get a brief shot of King Aegon on his dragon. My guess would be that he spent far too much time drinking and womanizing, and not nearly enough time learning how to ride his dragon, so he's going to be about as good at riding his dragon as he is at being king. There's also a tantalising cluster of shots at the end of a battle scene with dragons flying overhead, and people running away from dragonfire, so there are going to be some real battle scenes in the upcoming episode, as well as the usual drama between the characters. It promises to be very good. Thank you for watching this video, I hope you've enjoyed it. Please subscribe to make sure you don't miss the next one. Goodbye.